My friends, this morning I'd like to talk about terms, words that are used in the fourth way, which you will hear me say, and perhaps I can define them or elaborate on them. But before that, I have to say that the task which is before all of us who study and seek and are on the path and seek to be on the path seems so daunting and so overwhelming, and it also seems as if it cannot be done, that I know yesterday I had doubts that one should even speak about such subjects or even have the arrogance and the vanity to speak of great things when there really is nothing and nothingness, and that my words would be just empty. But the great Lord God, the great Son God, the radiant God of our universe, of our existence, who every day shines upon the glorious earth and gives us life, every day shines upon the wicked and the righteous, or the righteous and the wicked, both equally. For the gods love us, although they hold us accountable and ultimately will not suffer the harms we do to the earth forever. But they love us. And so the sun has not withdrawn its life force for us. And so there is hope for man. And that is heartening. And so it encourages me to speak, for I cannot speak if I believe it is for me or to satisfy my needs or my vanity. I believe that it is the will of the gods that we are here. So, I am happier today. Now, let us talk about a few terms. First, in Fourth Way, there are so many good books, and I just want to say and mention a few that, for I have no way of knowing who watches and listens, someone who is very well versed in Fourth Way or perhaps someone who is not. But anyway, of course, Gurdjieff and Uspensky, Search for the Miraculous, Tertia Morganum. In typology, the Enneagram, of course, the great book by Helen Palmer. Don Riso. Of course, I cannot leave out the wonderful Sophia Well-Beloved, and her book is invaluable. There are others, Dr. Bazell, J.G. Bennett, of course, the great Orage. I had in college the great, amazing ability to access his original writings. And in the library, we had a special rare books section. And I was able to read some of Orage's writings in his original letters. Though that said, I wanted to mention that because all of these are resources for those who study Fourth Way and seek to actually do Fourth Way. Back to terms, because when I speak to you, I say many things. One, you will hear me say man this, or man. I want it to be understood that it is a literary device. By man, of course, I mean all of our species. Man, qua man. Women, sexualities, all sexualities, masculine, the spectrum from masculine to femininity, all. When I say man, I hardly, of course, mean just men It means all of us, all races, all colors, all variations, all sexualities, man. That is when I speak about, when I say man. But as a literary device, it's too difficult to say, and I just say man. The concept of selves, so fundamental to Fourth Way, is the idea and the concept that we are not one unified self. We tell ourselves we are, and we say, yes, I do this, I do that, I am doing this, I am Jerry, I am Sam, I am Paula, and so on. But really, we are many selves, and these selves tend not to know about the other self. Gurdjieff called that in between the Kunda buffer. That is a made-up term. Gurdjieff would make up terms, words, so that he would not have words that were already freighted with meaning. And so he would create a new word, Kunda buffer. And that is the buffering of one self to another self in a person, in a man. And it is so that the man continuously feels like he is one self, but in actuality, he is many selves. There are exercises that in the schools that will make one eventually truly understand this. Just to say it, one does not have the understanding of it or the realization of that. But here we just talk about the knowledge of that we have many selves. So the term of when I say selves, there are many eyes, small eyes. In other words, you are not one I. This runs counter to Western thinking that you were born, you are a person, or perhaps even the Christian, mainly the Christian, the idea that you are one person that inhabits a body, which is an inviolate, permanent self, and you just have one self. And of course, the Christians want to say that that is the self that should be saved. The truth is that man is many selves and not in unity. And of course, the quest for Fourth Way is to achieve eventually, through work on oneself, unity, and to become reborn, as it were, into a unified one person. That is the task of life, and that is becoming the fullness of a human being. But man, as he is born, is a disparate, fractured creation. Unlike the animals, man is comprised of many selves, and those selves do one thing. One eye does this, one eye says this, one eye does that or this, and then another eye steps forward into consciousness. But in truth, there is no permanent self. So that is that concept and term. The idea of being level, being in the Fourth Way. What do we mean by being? In Fourth Way, we have centers. We talk about centers, and centers are really just defined psychical categorizations. And we speak of an instinctive center, a moving center, an emotional center, and an intellectual center. The intellectual and the emotional perhaps have a higher and a lower part to them. So these centers are, say, the instinctive is the automatic functioning of the body. Your breathing, your heart, these things you are not consciously able to control. And those are part of your instinctive center. Your appetites, your hungers. Moving center, such as when you do athletics, sports, movement, the motions of the body. The intellectual center, your mind, the ego. I also am a great student of Freud. So the mind is the mentation, the various forms of mentation that the mind uses, rationality, logic. And then there is the psychological, the concepts of Freud, id, ego, superego, catharsis, cathexis. But when I say being level, the being level, man's being level, were he unified into one, his being level would be complete and full. But he is not fully human. He is less than human. And so his centers are not unified. And this is in contrast to the animals. Animals are of perfect and high being. How can I say that? Because an animal is what it is. And it matters not if it is a wild animal or an animal that has been genetically modified through evolution or even selective breeding, such as man has done with, say, dogs or horses or cattle or whatever. But just for an example's sake, let's use the cat, cats are quite ancient and genetically really have not changed since 4, 5, 6,000, perhaps 10,000 years. So a cat is of complete and full being because the cat is what it is. Its actions, all of its centers, its instincts, its emotions, its thinking, all are as nature created it. And that is divine. Man is the highest animal, or should be the highest animal, but man's being level, his centers, are not in unity anymore. Perhaps they were in times past, but man is on a de-evolutionary arc, and he becomes more and more asleep. Sleep is a concept which, in the fourth way, can be understood as the being level as lower and lower. The centers do not operate together, but the centers are they are in disunity. In other words, man's instincts now in his de-evolved state, his instincts are separated from nature, and his instincts no longer guide him. He separates himself with his ego. He separates his intellect from his body. He creates a mind-body duality. Read Descartes. And the hold of the Western man is a mind-body duality. And that is a lowering process of the being level. We speak sometimes of the various laws. I will just mention the law of two and the law of three. The law of two is that things turn into their opposite. Love turns to hate, hate turns to love. They go back and forth, and nothing changes. Man has an action, there is a reaction, then a return to the other, a back and forth action, which does not accomplish anything but destruction. Almost all of life and all of man's activities are limited to the law of two. He really can do nothing because it just goes back and forth. We are educated, trained, socialized into thinking that modern man progresses into a futurism. always becoming more, but that is an illusion and not true. Man is trapped in the law of two, and it's just back and forth, and there is no completion of any activities, and anything he does brings about unintended consequences. He thinks he knows what he does, but as Jesus said, man knows not what he does. The law of three is the way out of the law of two, where there is thesis, antithesis, and finally a synthesis. And perhaps this goes too much more into it, but one can study dialectics and the process of dialectics, historical dialectics also. So there is a synthesis. And in the fourth way, for those who are more advanced, there is the concept of progression in the octave. And the octave, as I'm sure I am not well versed in music, but if you understand the octave, and the octave being a divine sort of a language, just as mathematics is the language of the gods and music is the language of the gods, that the law of octave shows that if man does endeavor to complete anything and to perform any action, he would have to surpass his being trapped in the law of two and move on to the three and then progress along the spaces of the octave. All right, I don't want to get too much into that. Perhaps that's a lecture for the future. What are impressions? First, what is food? Food in the fourth way means, of course, what we consume and eat. But in the Western world, we believe that food is just a fuel, as if man is a machine or a combustion engine. That's all we consider food to be. Even we say some food is bad or healthy, but we don't understand that food, in the Gurdjieffian sense, includes not only what we consume, say the bread or the food that we put into our stomachs, but also all of the impressions that enter our eyes, all of the things that we touch. All these are impressions which we are intaking as food. In other words, there is an interesting scene, this just came to me, in a very interesting movie called The Man Who Would Be King. And when the two main characters are traveling across the landscape on their way to go to the east, Tibet, they encounter. In fact, they were having a battle. They were having a war, and a group of monks crosses in front of their path, and the monks are being led by a small boy, and the monks close their eyes as they travel along, and this battle is raging along by them. That is a very telling scene, and really not probably understood unless one has studied Gurdjieff. The monks close their eyes because they do not want to intake and eat the impressions of this war that's raging, because those are bad impressions. Those are just impressions of negativity. And so they close their eyes because they would see them. Now, in Gurdjieffian fourth way, we understand that we need beautiful impressions because that feeds us. And so you see, in sleep, man does not understand what he needs. He needs beauty. He needs to be able to see and touch and connect with nature and animals because that feeds him. Not just the foods we eat, literally, but the foods that all of our senses intake. To touch, to touch. That sometimes it is so misunderstood how important it is to touch. Sculpture, artists who sculpts will tell you, of course, but modern man in his virtual reality, which somehow entertains him, is a starvation because man needs to touch. One of the greatest things that man can do in his life is to love another person. And could we even think of loving another person but without touching them? Sometimes with the animals that we love, can you imagine not being able to touch them? There is so much food in touch. You see, it's the senses, the body. We are designed by God, and God is nature. And so the idea, the concept, the Western man concept, the Christian concept that we are this immaterial soul within a physical body and that the body is just a carriage, as it were, carrying around our soul, is absurd and so antithetical to what Fourth Way teaches. We are our body, and we intake foods through all of our senses, and we need these foods to evolve and become human. So that's impressions and food. I don't want to go on too much longer. I've spoken longer than I thought. We will speak again. But I am so happy this morning because I feel that the gods would not place me here were it not for a reason. And that brings me so much joy and love. So we close now with a prayer. O Lord, great radiant God, Son, thank you. Thank you for what you give to us every day. Let me do thy will and not mine. I am as a beggar. I am as a monk. I am as nothing before the gods. Continue to give your love to us, Lord, and let us follow in your way. May the passing and going of the Lord, God's Son, cleanseth the world. Thank you, my friends. Goodbye.